The London fog, a familiar, unwelcome guest, crept through the cobbled alleyways. It swirled around the flickering gas lamps, their amber glows struggling to pierce the oppressive grey. Sounds were muffled, distorted. A distant foghorn moaned from the Thames, a mournful beast lost in the gloom. Each footstep on the slick stones echoed unnaturally, a stark punctuation in the city's hushed breath. This was a London that whispered secrets, that held its darkness close. It was a night for shadows to lengthen, for unseen things to stir. One could almost hear the city sigh, a subtle, unsettling hum beneath the surface of its usual nocturnal symphony. Young Edwin Pickering, a detective in training at the Metropolitan Police Academy, felt the chill deep in his bones. It wasn't just the damp air, it was a premonition, a prickling unease that had clung to him all evening. He adjusted the collar of his somewhat threadbare coat, a futile gesture against the pervasive cold. The streets, usually teeming with life, felt strangely deserted, as if the city itself was holding its breath in anticipation of something dreadful. He quickened his pace, the rhythmic tap of his worn heels the only company in the enveloping silence, save for the occasional scuttle of a rat in the shadows. A sharp rap at his modest lodgings door shattered the quiet. It was too late for social calls, too early for the milkman. Pickering's heart gave an uncomfortable lurch. He knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this summons was not routine. It carried the weight of the fog outside, the scent of something grim. He opened the door to a stoic police constable, his face barely visible in the dim hallway light, holding a sealed envelope. The wax seal bore the stern insignia of Scotland Yard, and within the unmistakable scrawl of Chief Inspector Hawthorne. The message was brief, curt. His presence was required, immediately. No explanation was offered, none was expected. This was the nature of their work, a life lived on the precipice of the unknown, often the unpleasant. Pickering felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. The chief inspector was not a man given to idle summons, especially not at this hour, not in this fog. The city's oppressive atmosphere seemed to seep into the small room, carrying with it a sense of foreboding, a silent promise of the darkness that awaited him. The game, as it were, was afoot, and the board was already shrouded in mist. Chief Inspector Hawthorne's office was a stark contrast to the swirling chaos of the fog outside. It was a place of grim order, smelling faintly of stale tobacco and endless paperwork. Hawthorne himself, a man whose face seemed carved from granite, regarded Pickering with an unreadable expression. "Pickering," he began, his voice a low rumble. "There's a nasty business afoot. The cobbler." The name hung in the air, heavy and vile. Another young woman found, her life extinguished, her shoes missing. The city was gripped by a quiet terror, a fear that walked its streets in the dead of night. Pickering, despite his youth, possessed a keen mind and a quiet determination that Hawthorne had noted. He was still learning the ropes, still absorbing the grim realities of police work in this sprawling, often cruel metropolis. Yet there was a spark in him, an analytical glint in his eye. "The cobbler, sir?" Pickering asked, his voice steady. Hawthorne nodded, his gaze unwavering. "He's escalating. We need a fresh perspective, an unconventional approach. Something different." The chief inspector leaned forward, his eyes boring into Pickering. "There's a man, a patient, at Bedlam Asylum, Dr. Alaric Mordaunt." The name sent a shiver down Pickering's spine. Mordaunt, the butcher of Blackheath, a brilliant psychiatrist whose mind had fractured, leading him down a path of unspeakable horrors. He was familiar with aberrant psychologies, perhaps too familiar. We believe he might hold some insight, some fragment that could help us understand this cobbler fiend. The thought of consulting a madman, a notorious killer, was deeply unsettling. It felt like a descent into darkness, a dangerous pact. "You will go to Bedlam, Pickering," Hawthorne commanded, his tone leaving no room for debate. "You will interview Dr. Mordaunt, gain his confidence if such a thing is possible. See if he can shed any light on this monster. But be warned, lad." Hawthorne's voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper. "Mordaunt is a master manipulator. He plays with minds as a cat plays with a mouse. Do not under any circumstances allow him to play with yours." The imposing grey edifice of Bedlam Asylum loomed large in Pickering's imagination, a place of shadows and screams, a repository of broken minds. Dr. Alaric Mordaunt. The name was whispered in hushed, fearful tones throughout London, a byword for brilliance twisted into malevolence. Once a respected psychiatrist, his insights into the labyrinthine corridors of the human mind had been lauded. He had walked among the elite, his intellect a shining beacon. But that light had dimmed, then grotesquely warped, revealing a darkness within that few could comprehend. His descent had been swift, his crimes shocking in their calculated cruelty, earning him the lurid moniker, the Butcher of Blackheath. Now, Mordaunt was Bedlam Asylum's most infamous resident. Confined but not contained, not truly. His mind, they said, was still razor sharp, a dangerous weapon even behind locked doors and barred windows. Pickering had read the case files, the chilling accounts of Mordaunt's methodical depravity. The details were sickening, a stark reminder of the thin veneer of civilization that separated man from monster. To seek counsel from such an individual felt like a betrayal of everything he stood for, yet Hawthorne's orders were clear. The cobbler's victims demanded justice, even if the path to it led through the very heart of madness. Bedlam itself was a place of palpable despair. The air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptic, stale food, and an underlying, indefinable odor of human suffering. The corridors were long and shadowed, the silence broken only by the jangling of keys, the shuffle of unseen feet, or the sudden, incoherent cry from a locked room. It was a world removed, a grim testament to the fragility of the human psyche. The very walls seemed to absorb the anguish, radiating a coldness that seeped into Pickering's soul. He felt like an intruder, an unwelcome observer in this theatre of broken dreams. The asylum staff moved with a weary, detached air, their faces etched with the strain of their thankless, unending task. They spoke in low tones, their eyes often darting nervously towards the more secure wings, where the truly dangerous, like Mordaunt, were housed. The anticipation of meeting the Butcher of Blackheath was a knot of cold dread in Pickering's stomach. He clutched his notebook, its familiar feel a small anchor in this sea of unease. He reminded himself of his purpose, to find a clue, any clue, to stop the cobbler, no matter how unsavory the source. But the shadow of Mordaunt loomed large, a chilling presence even before their first encounter. The walk to Mordaunt's cell was a journey into the deeper recesses of Bedlam's grim architecture. Each heavy, barred door that clanged shut behind Pickering felt like another layer of separation from the sane world. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, broken only by the echoing footsteps of Pickering and the stoic attendant guiding him. The attendant offered no conversation, his face a mask of professional indifference, yet his eyes held a hint of something akin to pity, or perhaps warning. This was not a place for the faint of heart. Dr. Alaric Mordaunt's cell was surprisingly sparse, yet impeccably neat. A single bed, a small table, a chair, and Mordaunt himself seated calmly reading a leather-bound volume. He looked up as Pickering entered, his eyes a startling pale grey, fixing on the young detective with an unnerving intensity. There was no overt menace in his gaze, but rather a piercing analytical quality, as if he were dissecting Pickering layer by layer. "Detective Pickering, I presume," Mordaunt said, his voice a calm, cultured murmur that sent an unexpected chill down Pickering's spine. Chief Inspector Hawthorne sends his reluctant regards, no doubt. Pickering, striving for an air of professional composure he did not entirely feel, introduced himself and stated his purpose. He spoke of the cobbler, of the fear gripping the city, of the desperate need for any insight Mordaunt might offer. The psychiatrist listened patiently, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. It was not a smile of warmth, but of something far more unsettling, amusement perhaps, or a deep hidden knowledge. The silence stretched taut and heavy as Mordaunt considered the young detective before him, his gaze never wavering. "The cobbler," Mordaunt finally mused, his voice soft yet carrying an undeniable authority. "A crude artisan, wouldn't you agree? Fixated on the foundations. Tell me, detective, what is taken yet leaves its owner with more to carry?" He paused, his pale eyes glinting. "A riddle, perhaps, to begin our little dance?" The question hung in the air, cryptic, unsettling. It was not the direct assistance Pickering had hoped for, but a game, a challenge. Mordaunt was not merely offering clues, he was testing him, drawing him into his own shadowy world. The air in the cell felt suddenly colder, the shadows deeper. Leaving Mordaunt's cell, Pickering felt a profound sense of unease. The psychiatrist's riddle echoed in his mind, a dissonant note in the already grim symphony of Bedlam. As he made his way back through the labyrinthine corridors, he was intercepted by the asylum director, Dr. Godfrey Wickham. Wickham was a portly man, his face perpetually flushed, his smile a little too wide, his eyes a little too eager. "Ah, Detective Pickering. A word if I may?" Dr. Wickham oozed a false bonhomie that Pickering found instantly repellent. He inquired about the interview with Mordaunt, his questions laced with a cloying curiosity. Charming fellow, isn't he? In his own unique way, Wickham chuckled, a wet, gurgling sound. Brilliant mind, of course. Utterly, terrifyingly mad, but brilliant. He then steered the conversation towards Pickering himself, his gaze lingering a moment too long, his compliments on the detective's youthful vigor feeling invasive and unwelcome. Pickering maintained a polite if distant facade, eager to escape the director's suffocating presence. Wickham's office, unlike Mordaunt's Spartan cell, was cluttered and opulent, a stark contrast to the bleakness of the rest of the asylum. He offered Pickering a sherry, which the detective politely declined. "A shame," Wickham sighed, pouring himself a generous measure. "One needs a little something to fortify oneself in a place like this, wouldn't you agree?" His attempts at camaraderie felt forced, and Pickering sensed an undercurrent of something else beneath the director's oily charm. Maybe a touch of fear, or a deep-seated insecurity. It was clear Wickham enjoyed the authority his position afforded him, yet seemed ill-suited to its graver responsibilities. As Pickering finally took his leave, Wickham placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Do be careful with Mordaunt, my boy. He has a way of getting under one's skin." The director's breath smelled faintly of stale wine and something indefinably sweet and sickly. "And do feel free to consult with me anytime. I have observed our dear Alaric for many years. My own insights might prove illuminating." Pickering extricated himself with a polite nod, relieved to be out of Wickham's oppressive company. The encounter left a bad taste in his mouth, another layer of disquiet in this house of shadows, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Mordaunt, from his cell, was somehow aware of every interaction, every nuance. Pickering returned to the grim reality of his investigation. Mordaunt's riddle. What is taken, yet leaves its owner with more to carry? Gnawing at his thoughts, he considered shoes, footprints, paths. The cobbler took shoes, but what did that leave the victims with? Only the weight of their absence, the burden of grief for their families. He visited the latest crime scene, a bleak alleyway in Whitechapel, the scent of rain and despair still clinging to the air. He meticulously examined the chalk outline, the discarded remnants of a life snuffed out too soon. His next visit to Mordaunt was met with the same unnerving calm. Pickering, frustrated, relayed his lack of progress with the riddle. Mordaunt listened, that faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Patience, detective. The most intricate knots are unraveled with a gentle touch, not brute force." He then offered another fragment, seemingly unrelated. "Consider the paths not taken, the journeys interrupted. The cobbler seeks not just a trophy, but a redirection." He gestured vaguely towards a small, almost childlike drawing he'd made, a winding path leading to a stark, abrupt end. Strange occurrences began to ripple through Bedlam. An attendant, known for his harsh treatment of patients, suffered a sudden, inexplicable fall down a flight of stairs. Whispers circulated that Mordaunt had merely looked at him a certain way moments before. Another patient, previously catatonic, began to speak in coherent sentences, quoting obscure philosophical texts that Mordaunt was known to favor. These events, though seemingly minor, added to the oppressive atmosphere, hinting at an unseen influence, a subtle manipulation of the asylum's fragile ecosystem. Pickering found himself increasingly drawn into Mordaunt's intellectual orbit. The psychiatrist spoke of art, of literature, of the hidden currents beneath the surface of human behavior. He never directly addressed the cobbler case unless prompted, yet his pronouncements, his philosophical musings, seemed to dance around the edges of it, offering oblique insights that Pickering struggled to grasp fully. He was a puppet master, pulling invisible strings, and Pickering, along with perhaps others within Bedlam's walls, was becoming one of his marionettes, dancing to a tune only Mordaunt could truly hear. The line between seeking help and being ensnared was becoming dangerously blurred. Mordaunt, during one of their increasingly frequent sessions, idly scribbled on a piece of paper. "The soul's attire often trod upon yet holds the journey's map," he murmured. Then, with a sly glance at Pickering, he circled a few letters within a longer, seemingly random scrawl of words. An old game, detective. Words within words, meanings hidden in plain sight. Later, back in his cold lodgings, Pickering painstakingly examined the scribbled note. The circled letters, when rearranged, spelled out Last Lane. Could it be a location? A reference to the final moments of the victims? His investigation into Last Lane led him to an old disused section of Bedlam's records, a dusty archive filled with forgotten lives. Following a hunch guided by another of Mordaunt's cryptic remarks about preserving the essence, Pickering requested access to Mordaunt's personal effects, confiscated upon his committal. Deep within a crate of books and papers, he found a small velvet-lined box. Inside, nestled on faded silk, was not a weapon, nor a damning piece of evidence from Mordaunt's past crimes, but a single, perfectly preserved lady's slipper from a bygone era, elegant and tragically small. It was not connected to the cobbler's victims, yet it felt significant, a relic of some private, twisted obsession. That evening, as Pickering pored over his notes, a shadow flickered at his window. He looked up to see a large moth, its wings patterned with a marking eerily reminiscent of a human skull, beating against the glass. A death's head hawk moth. He'd read of them. They were rare, considered by some to be an omen of death. Its sudden appearance felt like a tangible manifestation of the dread that had been coiling around him, a silent warning from the encroaching darkness that Mordaunt seemed to command. The clues were coalescing, forming a disturbing tapestry. Mordaunt wasn't just offering insight, he was curating Pickering's investigation, leading him down a specific path. The anagram, the preserved slipper, the unsettling appearance of the moth, they all felt like pieces of a larger, more sinister design. Pickering felt a growing unease that he was not the hunter, but the hunted, a pawn in a game whose rules were known only to the madman in Bedlam. The air grew colder, the shadows in his room seemed to deepen, and the moth continued its silent, macabre dance against the pane. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying suddenness. Last Lane wasn't a place, but a play on words, a typical Mordaunt flourish. The last lane, he realized with a jolt, the final resting place, and the slipper a symbol of Mordaunt's own twisted fascination with such tokens, a mirror to the cobbler's pathology. Mordaunt hadn't been helping him understand the cobbler. He had been grooming Pickering, using him. The strange events at the asylum, Wickham's unease, even Hawthorne's decision to send him, had Mordaunt somehow orchestrated it all? A cold dread washed over Pickering. He remembered Hawthorne's warning, "Do not, under any circumstances, allow him to play with yours." He had failed. Mordaunt had played him masterfully. The clues, the riddles, they weren't just about the cobbler. They were a distraction, a means to an end, Mordaunt's own end. He raced through the dark, rain-slicked streets of London, the fog swirling around him like a malevolent entity, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get back to Bedlam now. He prayed he wasn't too late, though a sickening certainty told him he already was. The asylum was in chaos. Alarms blared, their shrill cry echoing through the stone corridors. Attendants rushed past, their faces pale with panic. Dr. Wickham, his usual unctuous composure shattered, wrung his hands, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. "He's gone! Mordaunt, he's vanished!" he babbled, his voice cracking. Pickering pushed past him, his gaze fixed on the corridor leading to Mordaunt's cell, a grim premonition solidifying into horrifying reality. Mordaunt's cell was empty, the door hung ajar, its lock expertly picked. On the small table, where Mordaunt had so often sat calmly reading, lay a single, pristine white lamb's wool shoe, far too small for a woman, almost childlike. Beside it, a note, penned in Mordaunt's elegant script. "The shepherd leads, the lambs will follow. Some to slaughter, some to freedom. Did you enjoy our little game, detective?" Chief Inspector Hawthorne arrived moments later, his face a thundercloud. The betrayal was absolute. Mordaunt had not only escaped, but had made fools of them all. Days later, the city remained on edge. The cobbler was still at large, his shadow seemingly deepened by Mordaunt's audacious escape. Pickering sat in his bleak lodgings, the weight of his failure, his unwitting complicity, pressing down on him. The lamb's wool shoe from Mordaunt's cell sat on his desk, a constant chilling reminder. Hawthorne had been furious, but even his anger was tinged with a grudging, horrified respect for Mordaunt's cunning. Scotland Yard was humiliated, the press relentless. Pickering felt the keen sting of professional disgrace and a more personal, chilling fear. A small unmarked package arrived by the evening post. Pickering opened it with trepidation. Inside, nestled on dark velvet, was not a letter, but a small wax phonograph cylinder. His hands trembled as he placed it on his modest machine. He cranked the handle and a voice filled the room. Mordaunt's voice, calm, cultured, and laced with an undeniable amusement. It was as if the man himself stood in the shadows of the room, observing him. "My dear Detective Pickering," Mordaunt's recorded voice began, smooth as poisoned silk. "I trust this finds you well, or as well as can be expected. Our little collaboration was most stimulating, wouldn't you agree? You sought the cobbler, and in your own way you found a reflection. But you were looking at the wrong canvas, my boy." The voice was intimate, conspiratorial, as if sharing a private joke. Pickering felt a cold sweat prickle his skin. He was trapped even now in Mordaunt's web. The cobbler is a mere apprentice detective, a student of a cruder art, but there are masters still at play, and the game for us has only just begun. London is a theatre of delightful possibilities, don't you think? So many lambs, so many delightful lies yet to be spun. Until we meet again, Edwin, and we will meet again. The recording ended with a soft, chilling chuckle that echoed in the silence of the room long after the phonograph fell silent. Pickering stared into the darkness, the butcher of Blackheath's promise hanging in the air like a death sentence.